Yeah, my name's Pelling, and I'm a principal hydrologist for the URS in the UK, and I cover water resources and flood management in our water resource management team. One of my areas of specialism is looking at impact assessment of major developments. That includes housing development and large infrastructure projects. And I've been involved in the last 4 or 5 years undertaking a range of water cycle studies, which you may or may not have heard of. But these are quite a new study that the Environment Agency has been endorsing to look at the long-term growth plans of local authorities over the next 20 to 25 years, working collaboratively with the water companies and the Environment Agency to determine how sustainable that development is going to be over the next 20 years. And obviously there's quite a large, ambitious programme of growth that both the previous government and the new government want to push forward. And so these studies are very important to showing that the amount of growth that's proposed can be done in a sustainable way, and that the water environment won't be adversely affected by that growth. And some of the key issues that have come out of the studies that we have done are really that minimisation of water use is one of the key things that both developers and planners need to consider when they're putting forward proposals for development. One of the concepts that's come out of water cycle studies is water neutrality, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. But water efficiency is going to be key to deciding planning applications in the future. And so from this, we've looked at developing a tool which we call WaterZero, which looks at ways of helping planners to minimise water use right from the start of planning decisions and when planning applications are being considered. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the drivers behind the need for water efficiency. You're probably well aware of most of them, but it's still worth recapping kind of why water efficiency is important for development. I think the current drought that's ongoing in the southeast and east of England demonstrates that there are finite resources in the UK. We can't continue to keep abstracting from the rivers and aquifers that we have. There are limited amounts of water at certain times in the year. And with the growing population that's planned over the next 20 years, we could be seeing an extra 10 million customers drawing on the same resources that are currently struggling as we stand now. As previously mentioned, Chris was talking about the potential impact of climate change on water availability. The predictions are that the summers are going to be drier and there's going to be less rainfall during the summer months, which means droughts are going to be more likely in probability. There is a lot of variation in local planning policy about what water efficiency targets developers should be considering, and that's specifically changed recently with the move away from national planning policy guidance and the removal of the regional spatial strategies, which puts a lot more emphasis on local planning authorities deciding what their efficiency targets should be for development. Also, the Environment Agency are keen to look at the water cycle study approach at more development level. So rather than just looking at growth across a district, they're quite keen for very large developments to consider how water can be managed holistically on a whole site basis. And then there's the requirements of the Water Framework Directive. The amount of water that we use has an impact both on the quantity targets of the Water Framework Directive, but also quality in terms of the amount of wastewater that's generated from water use. And then there are drivers looking at more wider sustainability. People using less water means less carbon's used in heating water, for instance. And the Water White Paper is looking to put more value on water and how much it costs to actually use water to be more relevant to how much it costs to produce it for people to use. So we've completed over 30 district-wide water cycle studies. And as I mentioned in the last slide, there are two key issues that are coming out of it, and that's quantity and quality of water. Quite a lot of the local growth aspirations we've been looking at are well in excess of what the water companies have been planning for in their statutory water resource management plans, which they do over 25 years, but the targets that the water companies have been planning for are quite often lower than what the local authorities are driving to propose. And what that creates is a reduction or a deficit in the amount of water that can be available for local planning authorities in their growth area. And what that does is make it quite difficult for them to prove that development is sustainable and that it can be delivered in that time frame. Then one of the other biggest issues is quality. As I said, the use of more water means more wastewater needs to be discharged to the environment. And it's quite common that where there are current water quality issues is where there's also water stress. And so the more water that's used in those areas means there's going to be a greater impact on the water quality from those discharges. So URS has been developing several tools for these water cycle studies that looks at calculating water demand from allocated sites, looks at the cost, both financial and carbon, of delivering those water efficiency scenarios, looks at how achievable water neutrality might be in the future, and I'll come on to that in the next slide, and sets out guidance for developers on how they can achieve neutrality and reduce water use in their developments. So what is water neutrality? It's basically a high-level planning aspiration to ensure that there is enough water to support new development without requiring additional water resources. So in theory, it's quite similar to carbon neutrality, the idea being that the amount of water used by new development can be offset by reducing the amount of water that current properties use. So the Environment Agency's full definition is that for every new development, total water use across the wider area after the development must be equal or less than it was before that development took place. So the idea is you reduce the amount of water the new development uses as far as you can, and where there's still an increase, which there always will be, you try and offset that through existing development, through retrofitting of water efficiency. And so, as I mentioned, the ways to do that really are to make new developments as water efficient as possible, for water companies to extend their metering programme to 100% where possible, and then offsetting the new demand from existing properties. So URS has developed the WaterZero concept, and it's one of several research and development sustainability tools that we've developed over the last 2 years. And it has consolidated all the tools that we've been developing with local authorities and the Environment Agency to assess water efficiency. It's a tool in development. I'm keen to point that message out. But the phase 1 that we've developed is really a planning tool for local authorities to consider using, for the Environment Agency to use, to assess whether water efficiency is actually going to be deliverable at the levels they're talking about, and to assess whether water neutrality is even feasible in certain areas. So by inputting data into the tool, either at a district level or at site level, the tool will then tell you what water stress classification your development is in. So it will give you an idea of what the drivers are from the Environment Agency's perspective for reducing water use. It calculates the amount of water your development would use over the 25-year growth plan and determines the effect of water savings from policies that may be put forward. It determines the cost to the developer in delivering that level of water efficiency and the amount of carbon that would be used in that process. And it also gives the assessment of whether water neutralities are feasible or not. So to give you an idea of what the tool looks like, this is the interface. And when you input the data into the tool, it tells you which water company you would be served by from that development. And it allows you to input the targets in terms of water efficiency you think that you would like your development to try and achieve. And it's very important for local authorities to consider this, because they quite often put forward very strict requirements on developers to reduce water down as far as they can, looking at code levels 5 and 6, for instance, in the Code for Sustainable Homes. And this obviously has quite large cost implications for developers who have competing requirements on development and sustainability. So the tool gives you, across a range of scenarios that we've developed, how much water that your development would use over that period. And then by implementing a selection of different water efficiency devices, how much water you may save across each different area of water use. It can give the developer an idea of which code level they would reach through implementing different water efficiency levels. So working across the diagram, you've got the baseline using existing building regulation minimum requirements, and then moving through a range of more and more efficient type of scenarios, moving towards very high that we've got there, that introduces grey water recycling and rainwater harvesting into major development. And then the final bar chart on the end is a tailored scenario that you can pick exactly which efficiency devices you would like to include in your development. So the other outputs are the costs that are involved in delivering those. As I mentioned, it's very important that cost is considered in terms of feasibility. And it also gives, at the bottom chart, a payback period for developers in terms of how long those savings would take to pay off. And then the final output is the energy savings in terms of how much energy would be saved by the people living in the development. And you see the final bar chart on the end where we've got the very high efficiency scenario. You can see there's an increase in energy used compared to the high scenario, and that's because when you introduce grey water recycling, you're increasing the amount of energy that you might need to pump water around the system and to treat grey water to the standard that's required to reuse in the home. And then for local authorities, this water neutrality feasibility assessment gives the planners an idea of how many existing homes would need to be retrofitted with water efficient devices to make up for the increase that new development would have over the plan period. And it also gives an idea of how close you could get to neutrality if you introduce lower and lower amounts of efficiency. So it's a planning tool really to give local authorities an idea of whether water neutrality could be achieved or not. And it also outputs a range of potential policy recommendations that they can set on developers in terms of their targets for water efficiency. So just summarising where we would like the tool to be going, we're aware that water efficiency is only one part of the message, and that there needs to be a consideration for very large developments about site-wide water management and how you can manage rainwater runoff with potential reuse on a site. And this introduces the concept of water sustainable urban design, which is very big in America and very big in Australia, and it's something that's starting to come to the fore in the UK. And it's something the Environment Agency are very, very keen on promoting when considering large developments. So this is the direction we're currently taking the tool in. And really, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or URS have a stand in between the energy and water section, which you can come and talk to me or any of my colleagues about if you've got any further questions. Thanks for listening.